share with them tomorrow. Um, Thanks for being here. Thanks for your commitment to Cape Fear Academy and to this small piece of its future for next year. And I'm really excited to share this information with you. So sort of to start, I just wanted to name some of the design principles that really informed our schedule, right? The daily schedule is so important because it's how we use our most precious resource, which is time. And it's got to be mission first, right? The mission is at the heart of everything we do. And if ultimately we have a schedule that doesn't connect with our mission, then certainly we haven't hit the mark, right? Academic excellence is an enduring value. When we were thinking about designing the schedule, we needed to make sure that we stayed committed to that. Wanted brain science to guide our work and to really focus on how students specifically learn and thrive. Luckily, there's a lot of overlap between how faculty members thrive and how students thrive. We're all learners, but it should be student-centered. And I'll name in a little more specificity what kind of brain science ideas and takeaways we were focused on. Something we really felt going in is that community at CFA is deeply valued and underserved by our current schedule. And it's worth pausing to say that all of us on this call right now, and certainly I can, even after being here a relatively short time, can name 10 community events and community moments that are profoundly powerful. But I actually would argue that we're accomplishing that in some ways despite our current schedule rather than because of it. And I hope there'll be a little more because in what we've built. The volume and frequency of student autonomy and choice matters at CFA. We want our students to be prepared for college and life. That means in an age-appropriate, scaffolded way, increasingly becoming independent and making choices over time. And we'll talk about that too. Naturally, another design principle is just we have some operational realities that are somewhat CFA specific. We share a lunch facility that happens at other schools, but certainly not all schools. We have this distinctive athletic travel challenge where half of our catchment for opponents is the middle of the ocean. And so we're often a little more distant than some schools from the places we play, and the travel times are longer. And then cross-divisional teachers need to be accounted for. We need to make sure that we're able to provide excellent educations in every classroom, including those that have some teachers who are doing some middle school work and some upper school work, most specifically. We went through a really extended and thoughtful process. I've talked through this at previous parent coffees, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. In some ways, I want this in here so that when I share this recording and share this slide deck, you have a chance, if you want, to go back to it and look at it a little more thoroughly. But we looked at peer schedules. We talked about brain science. We had committees really dig in and do design work and get feedback. We had a lot of faculty input. Again, lots of peer schedules that we looked at a lot of different schools. And as I shared earlier in the year with many of you, again, at some different parent coffees, we had some pretty consistent differences between our daily schedule that we're using right now and the ones used at that wide range of schools that we looked at. So that stood out to us and informed our process. And again, you'll have this on the slide deck, but we have so much to get through and it's a lot to process. So I want to kind of get to that, get to the actual schedule as soon as we reasonably can. But I do want to pause on brain science, right? A couple of really important ideas that you'll see reflected in our schedule. One is that transitions have a cognitive cost, right? When you have to switch from one activity to the next, that takes a little bit out of you, and it takes a little bit out of what kind of the available brain space you have is. That doesn't mean we can't do that well, and obviously it's a life skill to do that well. But it is true that you want to be thoughtful about how many times you're asking learners to do that. Engagement capacity varies over the course of the day, right? Students have sort of peak learning times and times where it's a little harder for them to remain focused. Obviously, every student is different, but I think we'd all agree that at 10 a.m., most of us are a little sharper than at 3 p.m. Spacing and interleaving drive learning, right? So really what that means in layman's terms is like, don't cram for tests, right? Having a break between really powerful learning experiences and then returning to that material is the best and ideal way to learn. Breaks matter. We need to decompress. We need times to relax. That's really critical for health and wellness. Predictability is a natural preference, right? So we wanted to have a balance between something new and dynamic that changes over the course of the day with, well, where can we create some predictability so that students also feel like they know what's coming next and feel comfortable. And then choice and voice are inherently motivating, right? Our students want to have a choice in what they do. and how they spend their time. So this is sort of our agenda for the evening. How does the schedule work and what does it mean for my child? I want to look at it piece by piece, right? Academics, community building, and then freedom, choice, and accountability sort of grouped together. And I'll pause here to say to you, or at least share with you some of the things I said to the student body earlier today, which is I asked them to put their sort of expectations and assumptions aside. I understand that they sometimes think of me as like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons, but I assure you that I'm not. And I really want great things for them. And I just said, I'm excited. I want them to be excited. Whatever they think the schedule is going to be, just try to really put that to the side and listen to what it is and sort of judge it on its merits. I asked them to really listen closely and weigh the pros and cons. And I'll say the same thing to you. I think it's an extremely fair expectation for you to walk away from this saying, on the balance, the things I'm excited about really significantly outweigh the things that I liked about the previous schedule or I wish were a little different, right? So there should be a real imbalance, but because there are more ideas and more valuable things that we can do with kids than we can fit into the day, there's inevitably a little give and take. There will be things about the schedule that aren't perfect, but you have to weigh those in the context of the totality, which is part of why I'll hold questions for the end and ask you to put them in the chat whenever they come to you. Bethany Fee is going to be sort of keeping track of those and making sure that I get to them ultimately. But because you need to look at all the different pieces and how they come together, we'll want to kind of follow through that process. The other thing I said to them is, hey, change is overwhelming, right? This is significant change. This is meaningful change. So I want them to be opinionated and I want them to respond and I want to validate their emotions. But I also want everyone to sit with it and kind of continue to reflect and keep listening so that we can kind of grasp all these moving pieces and then develop sort of that clear sense of how we feel and what we think of it, whether that's, good, bad, or indifferent. So with that, let's sort of start digging into it piece by piece. So headline changes from an academic standpoint. And again, just bear with me. I'm going to show you a lot of visuals. I'm going to share this presentation, share a recording of it. So just kind of, it's a lot to process, but there'll be a 10-day cycle of classes in a blue week, gold week pattern, right? And those classes will rotate and meet at different points during the day. So there's that balance right off the bat of variation that we think is meaningful with some predictability. We could have done like a 7-day schedule or something that rotates, and Monday is day 1, and the next week Monday is day 6, and the next week Monday is day 2, I think. But we instead have a 10-day pattern where it's a blue week and a gold week, and you can map things out and follow it much more clearly, particularly as you get settled into it. 5 courses will meet each day, right? So courses will meet 7 out of 10 school days. That's 4 days in 1 week, 3 days the next. All the class sessions are 60 minutes. And there's more frequent, you'll see more frequent and consistently spaced decompression time. The other thing that I want to highlight as really deeply connected to academics is the way that the new schedule diminishes the impact of early dismissals in a way that I think will help our students achieve at a higher level and experience lower stress levels. So that's just sort of words on the page. Let's look at just one class period to start. So our current schedule, this is when D period meets across the week, right? In the new schedule, and again, do what you can not to try and read all of it at once, just focus on the highlights for now. D period rotates across those 2 weeks, right? So to return to that brain science, right, you're going to notice a couple things. One is that idea that engagement capacity varies over the course of the day, that it's ideal to see students at different times in the day. That's true for every single student. It's even more true for any student who's neurodiverse in any way. I have a brother who's an outstanding Spanish teacher who's dyslexic. I have a youngest son who's ADHD. And let me just say that having the same class, say a math class at the end of the day, every day, was hitting them in particular, and all students, but them in particular, at a point that they were already fatigued, that they were already fighting to stay engaged. How much better for them to sort of have a balance and for their teachers to see who they are, in this case as math students, based on who they are at 8:10 in the morning, who they are sometimes at 10:40, and of course, sometimes who they are at 2 o'clock. The other thing you'll notice here as you look at the highlighting is that the classes don't meet every day. And I know I said that, but you can see it much more clearly. So D period doesn't meet on Tuesday. It doesn't meet on Monday in the Gold Week, and it doesn't meet on Thursday in the Gold Week. That spacing and interleaving are at play there, where a deep engagement with the content followed by a break, followed by another engagement, not only allows us to do some other things with the schedule to rotate it, but also are healthy in their own right. So this next slide is a blast of color, but it's really just academically, what do all the courses, what do all the sections look like rotating over the course of the week? And you can see that there are 5 each day. So that's really big in addressing that idea of transitions having a cognitive cost. Right now on Monday, Thursday, and Friday, we're asking our kids just academically to transition 7 times. And then in our new schedule, on every day, they'll be transitioning 5 times, with one day where they'll transition 4 times in that way. You'll also notice, not reading what it says, but just looking at sort of the colors, that there's a little bit more in the way of breaks throughout the day between classes. Obviously, there's passing times, and we have those now of like 5 minutes, but there are also some slightly more substantive things. So extending that, another thing the rotation does that's really huge is that early dismissal piece. Right now, we have early dismissal, say, at 1:30, where we have a game, say, in Durham or Charlotte or Greensboro, an away game. And right now, students are often missing F or G, and it's always F or G. Now, of course, there's the Tuesday and Wednesday flex, but it's not really possible for us to schedule our games mostly on Tuesday and Wednesday. I just don't think operationally that's proven to be true. And I'll get to this later, but the flex time often also has required activities like college prep that students still have to make up. But with some regularity, they're missing the same 2 periods. And if that is a period where they're particularly struggling, or it's one of their hardest subjects or their least favorite subjects, that means that over the course of, say, a fall season for soccer, for boys soccer, that a student might miss the same class, 6 times. And that's going to really be hard for them. In the new schedule, both with a rotation and with only the 1 class after lunch, and with that extra help little piece at the end to help kids get settled, figure out what to do next, get a head start if they're meeting with a teacher after school, they're going to miss much less class time, but they'll also, with much less frequency, miss the same class. So if they're missing, say, those 6 away games, it's much more likely that they're going to miss 1 English, 1 math, 1 social studies, maybe 2 of their language class. It won't be completely even, of course, but it's still going to be really a significant improvement in terms of them catching up and the energy and time teachers have to use to catch them up. So that's a real win. Now, I do want to name and not shy away or certainly be transparent about, hey, there's less academic time in this schedule, right? When you compare them, every 70 days, to use a common denominator, we had 3,220 minutes in our current schedule. As I mentioned and is captured in the slide deck, we had the most academic minutes of any peer school that we could find. Our schedule going forward will have 2,940 minutes every 70 days. And I include this comparison because I want to emphasize that this still allows us to be an elite academic school. Princeton Day School has the same total academic minutes. They're sending a lot of kids to Princeton. North Shore Country Day, where my aforementioned brother works, sends lots of kids to Northwestern. They have 20 more minutes every 70 days, but really negligible difference. Durham Academy has notably fewer minutes than we have every 70 days, particularly when you look, say, at Princeton Day School and factor in when AP scores happen and the fact that that's the same across the board for the entire country. We actually have significantly more academic minutes per class in that sense than they will, even with a start date of 9/3 going into June, whereas we start in mid-August and go into late May. So I'll come back to this. I know there'll be questions about it, but we really believe that while hitting on a lot of other priorities and strengthening the school and the experience overall for our students, that we will be able to continue to focus on academic excellence in really meaningful ways. So headline, I guess, just before I skip forward to talking about community, Matt Hall, our Director of Curriculum Instruction, is here tonight, and I'm using him somewhat just to listen to anything I might skip over or talk through too quickly. Matt, was there anything on the academic side that you wanted to highlight that maybe I missed?
I would just say that on the slide in which you're showing all of the class periods, lots of color, just want to highlight the fact that although there may appear to be chaos as you're looking at this for the first time, there's a great deal of predictability and regularity in that chaos. And so that if you notice following sort of Monday through Friday, left to right, class periods will always be A, B, C, D, and then E, F, G. And that just rotates through. So B period always follows A, C period always follows B. And that's a predictability that students will adjust to very quickly and see that there's not much difference in terms of their ability to be comfortable with each day.
Yeah, and I will say I'll return to this at the end, but I've lived 7-day rotations. I've lived this 2-week pattern. I know lots of people who did lots of schools, and I would say students and faculty adjust to it far more quickly than honestly I would have ever anticipated. We do find that people settle in pretty quickly to recognizing that pattern and being able to see it. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end about how we'll help them do that. So community building. More time is allotted to community building activities and co-curricular programs like clubs than in our current schedule. Community and choice times are spread much more evenly across the week. And you're going to notice that I'm no longer using the term flex time. And I'll explain why, but I'm going to be using the idea of choice time when students really get to choose, and special programming when we have non-academic or co-curricular programming that in many ways is required or something really important to us that just doesn't happen in your sort of standard course. Those lines that divide those two things will be a lot clearer than they are in our current schedule, where they're a little muddled. And cross-divisional connection is much easier to execute. The schedule is aligned with the middle school, and that will allow us, with some tweaks on, say, a given day for the lower school, to do some really cool and important community building things, at different points during the year. So I wanted to focus now on sort of the advisory piece first. Again, there's a lot to take in here, but what we have for advisory right now is 2 10-minute blocks every week. And a lot of that time is spent communicating key information. And it's just not a lot of time, and it doesn't leave a lot of space to connect one-on-one, right? In our schedule next year, and you have to ignore the scaling, right? We'll have advisory for 2 15-minute periods one week. And then the next week is a 15-minute, but also an advisory lunch, a time to sit down, pull kids aside if we need to, and have a little more time to do that. And also just bond and connect and strengthen that advisory program. On sort of special programming, we have assemblies, and you can see it says 60 minutes because it's every 2 weeks. And then we have this sort of muddle, as I said, on flex periods where we have a lot of community and choice time, but it's also blended together with things that are required, like college prep or 9th grade seminar. And so students, I think it's important to name that is choice time, and a lot of students look at it that way, but it's really only partially choice time when we're kind of comparing it. In our schedule for next year, the special programming is delineated, and you can see that we're going to build in a more intentional and more well-rounded program because of that, with college prep, health and wellness, convocations and special, guests, class meetings, something that I'm excited to find a way to rotate in, class cup and those really big community building events, all school assemblies like our Veterans Day assembly, things like 9th grade seminar, other connected pieces of advisory potentially, that list will grow. Now, I'm going to really focus in a minute on choice time and what our students get to do in terms of choosing where to be and what opportunities they have even to leave campus at times. But that special programs at the end of the Gold Monday, right, is not one of those choice times, even though it's at the end of the day. But one of the reasons for that is because it's 60 minutes, we have all kinds of flexibility to do really exciting things by flipping one class with just that end of the day period. So if we have something happening first thing in the morning, all we have to do is take the E period that day and push it to the end. If we have an extra long assembly where we want to say, do something like we did this year where Ben David comes and talks to us about responsible decision making. But we also want to meet in advisories and talk about wise decision making in small groups. Well, now we could have that special programs connected to assembly and blend those together. Obviously, Veterans Day doesn't necessarily fall on a Monday, but if we wanted to do something like that cross-divisional, really cool assembly that we did that took, an hour and a half, we could put special programs between assembly and club/extra help, and we've got that block. Maybe we want it a little later in the day, and that's when we do our Powder Puff football game, or something similar where it's a big time kind of like, hey, we actually left kind of the core campus and had to get across the street to the athletic facility. That takes some extra time to do that. We have the burgers over there. We have a great time, and we can manage it that way. So that's just looking at advisory and special programming. And it's sort of skirting around choice time for a minute. And that's where I want to go next, which is we really want our students to be able to flex the muscle of making wise choices and independent decisions frequently on a daily basis. Our current schedule actually really only allows any of that to occur on Tuesdays and Wednesday, mostly Tuesday, right? So Monday, Thursday, Friday, to be honest, we have the most rigid and student lacking in choice schedule of anyone that I've seen, right? Advisory is 10 minutes, lunch is 30 minutes. Advisory, they have to go right there. Pretty much told, here's where you have to be and here's where to go. Really the entirety of those days, except of course, if they have a study hall, and I'll get to that. And then we sort of, in my view, sort of build up pressure and then release that pressure on Tuesday afternoon, mostly. In our schedule going forward, again, you can see that it's much more spread out. Again, focus on sort of the total times, not just the scaling, right? Even if you combine all of the green coloring on this screen, right, you end up with 290 plus 340, right? A sort of maximum of 630 minutes. In our schedule next year, across 2 weeks, students will have 675 minutes across 2 weeks. So they'll have notably more of that choice time, clubs and extra help time, lunch, break, that extra help at the end of the day. Again, that extra help is also huge academically when you do miss class. Right now, if you miss class, you really have Tuesday and Wednesday to work with, or you hope that you overlap with a teacher in study hall, or you come after school. Now, every day, pretty much there's at least some moment where you could go and say, well, maybe I could connect up with a teacher then, get the assignment, get the work that I missed, or ask the questions that I have. So that's even more true if you have a D period study hall in this case, really any study hall. In our current schedule, of course, many students work very hard and think very carefully about what they take so they can get a G period study hall. I'll show you why I think that sort of benefit of what you get from a G period study hall is spread more equitably across a wider range of students. But let's pretend for a minute we have a D period study hall, which is sort of landlocked, right? That study hall occurs in the middle of the day, and occasionally one day you have this nice big chunk where it abuts break. In the new schedule, you'll see that sometimes that D period study hall is first, sometimes it's last, sometimes it's in the middle of the day and connected right up against lunch in some capacity. And so there's all kinds of opportunities opened up for students to make choices. I didn't start here with our students because I knew they wouldn't listen to me otherwise. This was the big, like, here's what you're waiting for many of them. And I recognize that as incredibly academically driven as they are. Well, what kinds of privileges will students have? So this is our plan for next year, right? Right now, students in 9th grade are in a required supervised study hall for the first semester of the year. And I think that's really healthy to get them up and running. After that, and this will seem, very standard to many of you who have older kids, they can choose where they go on campus within the boundaries of what we expect during study hall. So they don't have to check in with somebody. They can go to the commons. They can hang out outside for a little bit. They can go to the math lab, but they get to choose. And again, they don't have to report. So that basically is just a continuation of what we did this year. The other question is, well, hey, when my study hall rotates through, could I come to school later in the day? Or could I leave early if it hits last period? Now, of course, I might have work I need to do. I might need to connect with a teacher, but it's at least an option for me. And the answer is starting in quarter 4 of 10th grade, We think more of the kids are driving at that point. They've really dug in and sort of proven themselves and are ready to go academically. That's a really positive time to say, hey, we think you're ready to start really thinking about 11th grade. So you can now arrive late and leave early. I think earlier than that puts a lot of pressure on families to figure out whether they can or can't make that happen. Similarly, okay, what on designated days? Really important to say designated. Those are days with lunch and clubs or extra help next to each other, or a study hall that abuts lunch, right? So the days where there's special programming, the days where they're advisory lunch, those are not designated days where this can happen. Starting after Q1, juniors and seniors can go off campus for lunch. We want, seniors are sort of special. Senior privileges are important and valued and sort of a standard part of independent school culture across the country. This extension of these kinds of privileges down beyond seniors is something I think that's cool and exciting, but also very CFA specific. We want everyone, seniors aside, to really be invested during that first quarter into trying clubs, getting connected, building community. And then I think after sort of that first chunk of the year, you say, okay, look, I'm in when I'm in. I'm free when I'm free. I think I'm ready to take on this responsibility. You can go off campus for lunch, again, juniors and seniors. And then on just a study hall, no matter where it falls, what if it's like mid-morning? Seniors are allowed to say, hey, if you want to run to Starbucks, you can do that. Everybody else, we ask, hey, you've already probably spent some of your study hall time maybe off campus this week. Why don't you really make sure that everything's set? That junior year is so important. Why don't you get the help you need and use those study halls, those fewer study halls wisely? So it's important to note that accountability is also an exciting piece of this, because privileges you give, as parents, are things that you can also ask people to earn or take away as necessary. So, hey, if you've got missing assignments, if your academic performance isn't where it needs to be, and we'll set, not tonight, but sort of some expectations and some clear standards, hey, you could lose, these privileges no matter what age you're at. If your attendance and tardiness is a struggle, that's a reason you might lose these privileges. Right now, sometimes we take driving privileges from students if they're late for school with a fair amount of frequency. That can be tough on families just because, now I have to get them to school. I think it might work better for everybody, a world in which we say, well, you're no longer allowed to go off campus for lunch, but you can still drive yourself to school potentially. Failure to sign in and sign out is going to be an even bigger deal than it is this year. So just, be ready for that. There's going to be really distinct consequences if you don't sign in or sign out. We've got to know if you're on. The more students are able to go on and off campus, that puts even extra pressure on us to know, well, who is on campus right now and who is not. I've said this to students, but I can never be looking at a firefighter and saying, I'm not sure if there's anybody in that building. That's something I need to know. And wise decision-making and distance from campus matters. We're not going to be tracking kids. I'm not going to hide beneath the counter at a Chick-fil-A in Ogden. But if we hear that students are, going really far afield in a way that might be unsafe, that's going to matter to us as well. So obviously, this will range in terms of what students can do at a given moment. But I do want to just say, okay, what if my kids in Q2 of their junior year, what does this look like for them? And what can they do? What opportunities do they have? That may be something they really want to talk about and that matters to them a lot. And this sort of highlights that. Now, again, it's going to vary depending on what study hall you might have. About 85% of our students have a study hall. But this is the chunk, right? So on a Blue Monday, there's extra help, lunch, and then study hall. There's a nice long period of time that you could go off campus if you have that D period study hall. Similar, you could come late on Blue Wednesday and then go off campus for lunch. On a Blue Friday, by happenstance, if you're not invested in a club and you don't have something really important to get done that day, you could actually theoretically depart campus fairly early, right at 12:50 on that day. And you can see how that flows through the rest of the week. Again, depending on what study hall you have, the balance of whether maybe it hits the morning more often or hits up against lunch more often or hits the end of the day more often is going to vary a little bit. But what this will really mean is that students consistently have opportunities to make meaningful choices, whereas right now that happens mostly once a week on Tuesday afternoons, and to some degree if you have a G period study hall. But it'll be nice for us just in terms of making the schedule work and getting kids into as many classes as they request as we can that they request. It'll also be helpful not to have G period be sort of a problematic period. So I'll pause there and just say again, I know questions are out there and we're near the end of this really intense information download. But I'll ask again, Matt, is there anything you want to highlight that I missed?
No, you did a phenomenal job. There are a couple questions in the chat. If we want to jump into those, the first is, will seniors who are 18 or older be allowed to sign themselves out without a parent's permission for each occurrence?
Yeah, so in these circled pieces that I have, seniors and juniors, when you look at that sort of privilege list, if you're on that, there'll be a document in my backpack, I imagine, at the start of the year where you sign once, and I know that's not the question, where you say like, yeah, I'm cool with this. And then beyond that, they do not have to check, because if we have given them the privilege, they don't have to have specific parental permission on that day. I love the emphasis on the signing in and signing out, because that is the critical thing, though. No matter what, they still need to sign in and sign out. So it won't be so much about who's 18 and who's not. It'll be more about what age they are, whether the My Backpack form for the year has been filled out. I mean, what grade level they are. That would be the defining thing. Before we take more questions, and I'm glad I'll switch to that in just a minute. Let me just say, like, how will my child know what day it is? One thing that's massive that I can't emphasize enough in a lot of ways is right now, senior systems does not, our current learning management system does not allow you to easily see, or your child to easily see, or quite frankly, me to easily see what their schedule is within the structure of the actual daily schedule, right? So I can see what courses they're in and what periods they meet, and then I can cross-reference and say, okay, it's A period. That's what they have A period. Where are they? Next year, with a new learning management system in place that's gonna support us, and we'll have lots more information coming to you about that. You're gonna actually be able to see your child's actual schedule across that 10-day cycle. We may also do daily emails. We can also do signage updated daily. And I also really believe that in 2 weeks or so, people settle in really quickly. So I'll pause there. That's the full schedule just up on the screen. And then glad to take additional questions.
And just to follow up on that, Ran, the question in the chat was about, how far in advance we'll be able to see those schedules for our students. Fortunately, with the system we'll use next year, in August, if you want to see what your child's schedule looks like on December 2nd, you'll be able to see that, make that appointment as needed, to make sure that doesn't interfere with a specific class. So we will have that access in the system next year.
Yeah, and one of the advantages both of being able to see that in the system will help you. And then even if you're just trying to like think about it and you're not in front of a computer, the Blue Week, Gold Week structure will also help you just be able to say, like, kind of, my kid actually does know, what they're doing every Wednesday afternoon. So hopefully that will be kind of helpful on all fronts. Any other questions?
Yes, we have 2 more in the chat. First one is, classes are now 60 minutes in question mark. How do science classes have time for labs, etc.? Does this new schedule make for less classroom time overall than previous system? So I think the first thing is classes are not 60 minutes. So if you want to address that, and then how we're going to have time for labs.
So all classes are 60 minutes. You'll notice, and I didn't include this, and I could add it to the slide deck. When you're looking at my screen right now, you'll have to trust me a little bit on this, that every class abuts break at least once during the cycle. So one of the things we've talked about with science teachers is, hey, we need to maybe adjust. We need to do some PD and really focus on what can we do in 60 minutes that's effective. But if once in a while we have a special lab, or we want to go off campus and go to Halliburton and walk around and identify, plant life, that on those days where you're doing something hands-on and kinetic, potentially missing break is not the same thing as just listening to me lecture and talk at you for another 20 minutes. So there will be opportunities for teachers to sort of book in advance and say, hey, I have this really great thing going on. It's going to require maybe that I hold these kids for break. And so that'll be a way that we keep some consistency and have the 60 minutes, but also still make sure we don't lose too much of the really standout things that maybe took 80 minutes, while we also say, well, what really required 80 minutes and how often? And then I'm sorry, there were a couple of different pieces to that question. Could you repeat one of that, Bethany?
Yes. So how do the science classes you addressed, and then does the new schedule make for less classroom time overall than the previous system? And that was addressed in a slide earlier.
Yeah, so it does mean for less classroom time than the current system. Our current schedule has more classroom time than any other schedule I know of. And we feel really confident that we can still achieve our goals and have academic excellence with the schedule we're moving to, but it is less time. Just to, this is overwhelming, but if you want, I did include this at the end. Matt and I did a really comprehensive, not just like in a vacuum, but let's look at the actual days we have planned for next year. And what does that look like kind of month by month, period by period? What's the difference and how long you've gotten to see a class? And ultimately what it nets out to over the course of the whole year. And again, I think it's important to be honest about this and transparent, is that you've got 580, let's make sure I get it right. And so you'll have about 10 fewer total class sessions for each class. Now, we have 4 fewer total school days next year because of other things. So the actual impact of this schedule, specifically the daily schedule change, is 380, which means about 6. So yeah, there's less class time next year than there was this year.
Next question we have is, how will testing work? Will teachers have 2 or 3 versions of each test, since different sections of each class won't necessarily occur on the same day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'll say, let me stop sharing for a minute so maybe I can see myself and see you. And I can obviously go back to sharing. So the answer is, teachers will have to make some adjustments, and we'll be doing professional development over the summer to be thoughtful about how we assess. But realistically, our kids are never taking all their tests on the same days now. Kids get sick, kids have athletics, kids miss class. So it's not like we're absolutely perfect. That's why we have an honor code and why we emphasize it so much in part. So I don't think it'll be that every teacher has to make 2 or 3 tests every time. They'll probably have some kids taking the test on a Monday and some kids taking it on a Tuesday in certain cases. Again, could they make 2 tests as a way to manage that situation? They absolutely could. But I don't know that that will have to be the absolute necessity. So that's at least the answer there. There may not be testing days in the same way. I will say that this schedule actually gives a lot more opportunities for students to make up tests or come back and finish tests if they need extended time. Right now, sometimes teachers were waiting and sort of, I think, having lots of tests on Tuesday and Wednesday when the periods were longer to accommodate that. And I think we'll be able to do that more readily across, the entire week.
And I'll just add on to that. Our goal is to allow students to display mastery of both content and skill. And I can certainly say with certainty that I want all of my students to know exactly what's on every assessment when I give it. So, there's nothing to hide on that assessment. So the way in which we create assessments for students to allow them to display mastery, even knowing exactly what that content information is going to be, that is sort of the ideal assessment that we're asking our students to work towards.
Next question. Will the sign-in, sign-out process show parents if the student has left campus? Sorry. And it says the new management system, So will we have a way to share that data with parents?
No, we won't. We'll know, and we'll be able to make sure that we're aware. But part of the sort of trust process with the juniors and seniors to some degree is saying, hey, we trust you to make the right decision. If you start making poor decisions or just a pattern of sort of decisions we don't, like you're struggling academically, we'll address that. But I don't think that it would be parent facing to see like, well, what time did people sign out, or did my kid sign out or sign in?
Next question. With teachers teaching the same material to different sections, won't this be overly complicated for the teachers to keep up with what's been covered for whom?
So the good news is that is such an awesome question, and it's something our faculty immediately we're trying to think about, and it takes some getting used to, but the answer is no. You'll be teaching, let's just say, pretend our lessons are numbered across the year. You'll be teaching lesson 20 and lesson 21. And then the next day you might be teaching lesson 21 and 22. And the next day, 22 and 23. But part of that really robust full year analysis that Matt and I did was to really show our teachers that the times stay consistent. You never end up teaching, lesson 18, lesson 23, and lesson 28. It always stays paired. So it's a little bit of additional prep in the sense that, like, any given day, I need to know kind of today's lesson and tomorrow's lesson, if you want to call it that. But it never goes beyond that. And a lot of the benefits of this schedule in terms of decompression time, less stress on a daily basis, not every class meeting every day, also helps our teachers who are planning and prepping. So ultimately, I think it took some time to process that, but I think faculty were ultimately very positive on that front.
And next question, with less class time, will the AP classes have enough time to cover the material that they are currently covering and prepare for the AP exams?
It's a great question, and it's a fair one. And the answer is they won't have quite as much time as they had this year. But when we look at our peer schools and the strength of our teachers, which I'd put up against the strength of any teachers in the country, and we look at schools that are sending students consistently to other elite universities, we should be well positioned and better positioned than many in the Northeast, for instance, to have our students prepared for the AP exams. And I say the Northeast because most schools don't start till after Labor Day in the northern part of the country. So they have 2.5 weeks less than we do before AP exams occur. So look, it's a really fair question. And I'm certainly aware that we have to prove this, right? That people want to see our results remain really strong and beyond strong, outstanding on AP courses. And there may be little tweaks that we have to make to I don't think we give as much summer work for AP courses here as we did at my previous school, because my previous school started after Labor Day. So my teachers felt like I have to give them this little kickstart, because otherwise they're going to be behind the Cape Fear Academies of the world, just if we do everything equally by 2.5, 3 weeks. So there are little adjustments we may need to make. But I do feel confident they'll be well prepared. I don't know, Matt, if you would add anything to that.
No, I would agree. I would say that we're certainly not in a position now with our current schedule where we feel at all rushed to cover AP content. And so, I don't see what would be maybe the drop in actual class meetings by 6 or so on any given year to be a significant amount of time in which we can't still cover the content needed for that AP exam. Some of that is making adjustments, obviously moving to more 60-minute classes. What are the things that we might be covering over a week's schedule in our current schedule? And what does that look like as we spread that content material over let's say 10-day cycle in which we have 7 60-minute class periods. And I think our faculty are going to be doing that work in significant ways over the summer to make sure that they are fitting in all of that content coverage into what is our new schedule.
Bethany, you were muted there.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to record all the questions. So I had a question that was directed to me, but I thought it was a good one to share out with everyone. The question was, college classes are around 90 minutes. How do 60-minute classes help students prepare for college? So I want to answer this just briefly, and then I would like Ran and Matt to jump in. But I would say, first of all, in college, you have a choice. There's going to be a variety. There might be 50-minute classes. There might be an hour and 15-minute classes. There might be 3-hour classes. And I feel for students as they move through their college experience, they're going to find out what works best for them. Maybe it's that one class a week on Monday night for 3 hours that they love. So I feel like that's part of learning and growing. So I would say, for now, let's focus on our classes being 60 minutes. And then when they get to college, they're going to have that variety, taking classes in the morning, taking classes in the evening, and so on. But Ran and Matt, if you want to kind of answer the 60-minute piece of what we're doing next year.
I can jump in quickly, Ran. I think as we look at sort of the things you cannot do in a 50-minute class period that you are doing in that 80-minute class period. As insignificant as that extra 10 minutes may appear on the surface, it is a significant addition to all of the things that we might want to do in the class that the 80-minute class allows us. More opportunities for collaborative work or for presentations, and all those things that I think we have currently fit into 80-minute class periods, we can fit into that 60-minute, and really allow students the opportunity to engage more deeply, which ultimately is the expectation that they'll have in higher education.
I'm 25-minute classes or 80-minute classes, right? There's a legitimate discussion to be had there, but I don't think 60 minutes is insufficient on any level. And I think it aligns well with learners of all ages, right? Part of our challenge is that you can't have different length classes for seniors and ninth graders. And yeah, our seniors, they need to start getting their heads around 90-minute classes. Your average ninth grader in a 90-minute class, that's a really tough ask. They're sort of still halfway middle schoolers at that juncture, in terms of where their attention span and sort of study skills, if you will, executive function skills are.
One last thing I wanted to add was I had a direct message about the clubs, the number of clubs, and we have a little over 30, thanks to Mr. Fee answering that for me. But I'm hopeful that with this new schedule, we'll have even more. I know of a couple juniors that are working on, with Mr. Hall, a new organization for next year. So I think that this new schedule will allow students to branch out and get involved in new things and more things on campus.
And I don't know if Mr. Fee would agree or if he's, hiding off screen there, but I would say, to be honest with you, caring deeply and running a club is a very frustrating experience right now at Cape Fear Academy. It's always at the end of the day. A bunch of kids always want to leave and go home. A bunch of other kids got released early. A bunch of other kids have a required activity that's muddled together in that choice time / special programming time. And I think that we'll actually have so much more of a robust club program next year where there's more slots, but also we're clear about, hey, unless you need extra help, there aren't conflicts. And I also think when you're looking at older kids and like the ability to go off campus for lunch, I'm really hoping that kids who have 6 opportunities to go off campus for lunch will say, yeah, it's awesome. I take 4 of them, but the other 2 days, I go to these clubs that I think are so much fun and are really exciting. So I think that there'll be real opportunities to grow the club program, not necessarily in number per se, but in sort of its overall impact on our student life. Any last questions? I shouldn't say that. There's never last questions here. You can also just email me later tonight or after I share this and ask. I guess just to go back for a second, because there are some of those questions have been great, and they've been, we have to be really honest about it's that pros and cons thing. I feel, that, when you weigh the balances, there's so many things that are improvements with this schedule. And then there are a couple things where I'm like, gosh, if I could somehow create magic, I would have both of those. But I hope that that's how our students feel, and I hope that how you feel as well when you think, well, I don't love that piece of it, but it's balanced by these 5 other pieces that I'm excited about. Because unfortunately, that's sort of the reality of schedule building. It's certainly not a zero-sum game, but it's you can't have it all either.
Rand, if I could just chime in, I've been listening to this presentation, which I think is absolutely superb, not only in its delivery, but actually in the content of the material. I know that you and Carla and and Matt and others worked really, really hard on this. And I'm particularly pleased with the balance of trade-offs that went into it. As you allowed, there's no such thing as a perfect schedule, but this really does hit the mission. It gives the kids the opportunity to demonstrate accountability and maturity, and it gives a worthwhile and significant amount of attention to brain science and what works really well for kids. And so I couldn't be more impressed with the work of the team, and I couldn't be more excited for what lies ahead for us. And selfishly, as the person who gets to oversee a lot of community-wide events that we conduct, how great and simple they will be to incorporate into the routine of the great work that the teachers do with the kids. And so I say hats off to you and to everyone else. And for parents who care deeply about the cost of attending Cape Fear Academy, I want you to know that the best quote we got from consultants to do this was $50,000, and we paid zero. So great job, team. I'm really excited. I'm really grateful. And thank you all many of you parents, members of our community who tuned in tonight. I'm sure there'll be more questions coming down the road, and I know the team is happy to take them on, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that I endorse this, support it 100%. And I'm really grateful for the team's effort.
I appreciate those sentiments, although I'm not sure I fully realized just how much money was available on the open market for daily schedule processes. Well, if you have other questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out. It is a ton to process. It's certainly the kind of thing where you might later tonight say, oh, wait, I do have a question. I'm going to hopefully later tonight stop thinking about the daily schedule for the first time in, I don't know, 6-7 months. Once it's in there, it's hard to get it out. So thank you, and look forward to connecting again soon.
And Rand, I just wanted to share that there were 2 quick questions. The middle
please.
school is following the same schedule, just of course with a little bit of difference, but overall it's the same bell schedule, same periods, all that. And then start and end time for the day will stay the same as they are now.
Yeah, start and end time is the same. It was really important to us to align with middle school. I didn't highlight that because frankly, I didn't want to suggest on any level that there were things about this schedule that somehow weren't what we wanted because we had to align. But that is, there will be, I think, 3-4 days next year where that alignment leads to moments that are, that we all remember for a long time, because it'll be so much easier to have a field day or to invite 8th graders to come up and be with the upper school as they're thinking about the next steps in their academic journey. My favorite, I think at the holiday break, they said, what's your favorite moment of the year? And I think I said the Veterans Day Assembly. And that was a great example of, that was so wonderful, but we did have to like break the schedule and move a bunch of stuff around and have odd linked classes. And when we want to do something like that next year, it should be a lot cleaner. And because it's a lot cleaner, if we were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, it's only 2 weeks away though, I think we could say yes. Right now, we often say no because that's too disruptive, too quick, to not have everyone understandably a little grumpy about it. All right. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions.